The Enemy Below. This is episode 64.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casto, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
One of Star Trek's most popular episodes was actually based on a 1957 movie. I'm Bob Turner.
And I'm Kelly Casto. The film was The Enemy Below, and the episode was Balance of Terror. We're going to discuss both, but first, Bob, let's let listeners know how they can reach us.
Sure. Just visit our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/70s Trek. And you can also send us an email to 70strek@gmail.com.
You can also find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Just search for 70s Trek. When you do, please leave us a comment or a review. It helps others find the show.
One of my favorite moments from Balance of Terror happens near the end when Kirk and the Romulan commander express their respect for each other.
Yeah, I mean, after spending, 50 minutes beforehand trying to blow each other up?
Right. But, I mean, it's a great moment. And
Sure
I
is.
was really blown away when watching The Enemy Below to see something very similar happen at the end of that movie.
Yeah, that was great. And there are a lot of parallels, actually.
There are between the two. Well, why don't we get to it? Let me start, if it's okay, by talking about the film's production. The Enemy Below was released in 1957. It's the story, and I'm just going to give a little synopsis here.
Sure.
It's the story about a battle between an American destroyer and a German U-boat. It stars Robert Mitchum as Captain Murell and Curt Jurgens as the German commander. And you'll also see another familiar face, David Hedison, who uses the name Al Hedison, plays Lieutenant Ware. And we know Hedison as the captain of the Seaview from the show Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea.
Yes.
Yeah, and also there's a very young Doug McClure.
Yes.
Who plays Ensign Mary, and he actually goes uncredited in the film. McClure is best known for his work in The Virginian and lots of guest appearances in TV and movies throughout the 60s and 70s, even into the 80s. But he also starred in a show, and you might remember this, Kelly, from the 70s that sci-fi fans should remember. He played Grover, one of 3 secret agents in the NBC series Search. Do you remember Search?
Yeah. I thought you were going to go with the movie The Land That Time Forgot.
Oh, there's that too. No, I went with Search. Loved that show.
Yeah, I did too.
That's the next podcast we will do. And I think it's worth noting here also that there is not one woman in this movie. It's all sweaty, dirty guys.
There's one picture of one woman.
There's a picture, but I don't know if that counts.
No.
The Enemy Below is based on a novel by Commander Dennis Rayner. He was a British naval officer in the Second World War. Now, the film is actually pretty different from Rayner's book. Most notably is that the ship is not a British destroyer, but an American destroyer. And, of course, the final scene, and I won't describe it in detail here, but the final scene in the book is very different than what you see on film.
Yeah, definitely.
The ending had the destroyer captain taking a swing at the German commander. Now, the destroyer in this film, the USS Haynes, was an actual, real U.S. naval vessel. It was the USS Whitehurst. And many of the crew seen in the film are actually part of the Whitehurst crew. And even her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Walter Smith, is in the movie. You can see him as the engineering officer. And at one point, he's seen reading a comic book, which I'm sure when he's commanding the ship, he never has a chance to do.
Yeah, it's funny.
The end of the film is actually based on a real event as well. The USS Buckley in World War II rammed a German U-boat in combat. And so they took that incident and they put it in the film. And we know that this film inspired the Star Trek episode Balance of Terror. That's why we're here talking about it today. But it also inspired and was the template for a Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea episode. That episode was Killers of the Deep.
And it also used several, quite a bit of footage from this movie.
From The Enemy Below.
Right.
And of course, David Hedison was in both the film and the TV show.
Exactly.
Kind of interesting stuff there. So, Kelly, why don't we get into the story? Why don't you tell us about that?
Sure. So the American destroyer, USS Haynes, detects the German U-boat. The German U-boat, their mission is to rendezvous with a German merchant raider in the South Atlantic Ocean. So they've got this point that they need to reach. Captain Murell, he's kind of not doing anything on the ship at the beginning. And when they detect the U-boat, he goes into full gear. Nobody knows his capabilities on the ship because he's brand new on this ship. But he quickly, turns up the heat and shows that he is no slouch at all.
Yeah, the crew kind of have their doubts about him, don't they?
They call him a feather merchant because he was in the Merchant Marines.
Marine, yes. And the doc says at one point that this guy shouldn't be in command. He had a boat shot out from under him and spent 25 days in a raft. And so the crew
still recuperating.
Right.
Basically.
The crew has no idea who this guy is.
Yep. Now, the U-boat captain is von Stolberg, who played, as Bob said, by Curt Jurgens. He is a former U-boat captain from World War I. And he makes it clear through the movie that he's just not enamored at all with the Nazi regime.
He does, doesn't he?
Yeah, he sure does.
And it's a way to get us to sympathize with him a little bit.
Right. And there's a lot more that he goes on about, back then it was honor and everything. Now it's just more mechanical and not, his heart doesn't seem in it.
No, not at all.
Not that he's going to give up. He just, he's going through the motions, it seems. So Murell very skillfully stalks this U-boat. I mean, he's running parallel with the boat or with the U-boat, kind of trying to mask that he's, following him. At one point, the U-boat goes off in a different direction from the course that they had set, and Murell goes a different direction and kind of plots out an intercept course.
In a triangular pattern.
And
he somehow knows because he's seen other U-boat commanders do this, that he may end up with a torpedo up his butt if he's not careful, or that this German is going to go the other way, make a left, and make another left.
Exactly. And at one point, von Stolberg says something like, this guy is, reading my mind. Right. I don't know how he's doing this. He's very, very skilled.
Yep.
However, during this course of maneuvers, Murell duplicates a pattern that he's performing, and von Stolberg uses that to his advantage and puts a torpedo into the side of the destroyer. So now the Haynes is hit, but it's still functioning. It's taken on water. It doesn't have long, but it has one good engine left, and it still has some means of attacking the U-boat. So Murell tricks von Stolberg into thinking he's worse off than he is by having the crew, before they abandon ship, throw mattresses on the deck and light them with kerosene, making it look like it's all on fire and everything. he keeps a skeleton crew on board to man the bridge, the engine room, of the one engine room that's left, and the ship's guns. Well, von Stauberg takes the bait, and what Murell was betting on was that von Stauberg was going to surface before he finishes him off, and that's what he does. Von Stauberg says, through Morse code, you got 5 minutes to, abandon ship before I destroy you. Well, that gives Murell enough time to crank up the engines as full steam as much as he has, start heading towards the U-boat in a collision course, and he has his gunners on the deck shoot out the guns on the deck of the U-boat. They collide with each other. Well, the Haynes runs over the U-boat, and during all that, U-boat crew is abandoning ship. They're done. But in the meantime, von Stauberg sends his XO, Heine Swaffer, down to set the scuttling charges. So there's charges on a U-boat so that it blows it up and sinks it. Heine's hurt in the process. The captain of the U-boat goes down and pulls him out because they're actually friends. They've served for many, many years, and he doesn't want his friend to die. So he goes and saves him, pulls him up to the top of the U-boat. Well, as Murell is telling his XO and everybody else, get in the lifeboats, I'm going to be there. He notices that von Stauberg and Heine are on the top of what is that thing that goes up on a U-boat?
The conning tower?
The conning tower, right. They're there, just kind of waiting to sink. And Murell sees that, throws them a rope, pulls them onto the Haynes. And in the meantime, the crew in the lifeboat, who's pulling up not just the Haynes crew into this lifeboat, but also the crew from the U-boat, they see this and they're like, let's go get our captains. They get up, they help the captains off the Haynes into the lifeboat, all three of them, and they get away just as the U-boat's scuttling charges go off, and things start to sink. So now it cuts to a scene. They're on an American boat that has rescued them, and Heine Swaffer, his injuries that he sustained in the U-boat were mortal, so he died. They're committing him to the sea, as it were, and the Americans are standing around paying respect for a fallen soldier. And then the two captains have a nice little, here's a cigarette, and there's, have a nice little thing at the end. Basically, it's not like Balance of Terror exactly, but it is. You can see the mutual respect and potential friendship.
Lots of mutual respect there. In fact, if it's okay, I'd like to read their last couple of sentences.
Please.
The German commander says, I should have died many times, Captain, but I continue to survive somehow. This time, it was your fault.
Yeah.
And Robert Mitchum, in typical Robert Mitchum style, says, I didn't know. Next time I won't throw you the rope.
And the captain says,
and the German commander, yes, I think he will. Very cool stuff.
Yeah, very good movie.
It was. So let's talk a little bit about the similarities here. There are a lot of similarities between this movie and Star Trek.
Okay. So one in particular that I liked, and it's similar but not, the Romulans and Balance of Terror on two different attacks. throw space debris out, and to make the Enterprise to think it's dead, right, or destroyed. In this case, the U-boat captain, he jettisons a bunch of oil,
right?
So it produces a big oil slick.
So it looks like he's been hit.
It looks like he's been hit, and it's not coming up, so it very well could be destroyed. So that's kind of one similarity. Now that also happened in another movie where they actually sent out dead bodies, which was
Run Silent, Run Deep.
Yeah, Run Silent, Run Deep.
And these two movies, they are similar. They're not exactly like each other, but they're similar.
Right.
Yeah, I also, while watching this, I thought it was interesting. The biggest part that jumps out at me, of course, was when they were running silent, both in Balance of Terror and in The Enemy Below. They need to run silent so as not to tip each other off where they are. It's a great suspense building device.
It is. You're just waiting for somebody to knock something over, to make a noise, And one point, and I got to add this, I'm sorry, Bob, but at one point, the guy on the Haynes is reading a book called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire.
Right, I saw that.
And then on the U-boat, there's a guy reading Mein Kampf.
Yes.
Just like, I just busted up laughing. I probably shouldn't have, but
right.
Just was funny.
That is good. So anyway, yeah, I thought it was interesting how they both pieces have that in there.
Yeah, I did too. So now I did have one problem with Balance of Terror, though. How does sound travel in space?
Right, it doesn't.
It doesn't. So I had to add that.
But their
nitpick.
Their sensors are so advanced. Who knows what they're really detecting? Perhaps
exactly.
Vibrations off the hull.
It could be.
You didn't think of that, did you, smart guy?
Vibrations. Let's move on. The other one was where Kirk is fooling the Romulans into thinking that they've severely damaged the Enterprise by, jettisoning along with debris this, a nuclear device. And Spock points it out quickly by scanning the debris. They detonate it just before it was catastrophic. And Kirk uses that to his advantage and plays dead.
To lure the enemy in.
Right. Murell does the same thing. As we talked about, the torpedo that hit the Haynes was not, instantly crippling. They actually had some capabilities. So they lured the U-boat and, up so that they could actually take them out.
And I thought it was great how Murell ordered Ware to grab all the mattresses, soak them in gas, and set them ablaze on the decks.
Yes.
So it looked like the ship was on fire.
Right.
Because as you said, it wasn't as badly damaged as he wanted the German to believe.
Yeah, exactly. So what else? What other similarities do you see, Bob?
Oh, I think we've already talked about it. Of course, at the end of the movie, Murell gives a nice salute to the German and then ends up saving him. They're comrades, even though they're not on the same side and have been fighting against each other. They've developed a mutual respect for each other's abilities. And the same thing plays out in Balance of Terror. Kirk and the Romulan commander very much admire and respect each other and feel a comradeship to each other. It was not only mimicked from the film, but it was done very well in Balance of Terror.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing, and this is kind of just more technical that I saw that was similar, the Enterprise was shooting phasers at the Romulan ship, and it was more like photon torpedoes, and so which is equivalent to depth charges that the Haynes was, dumping into the water to harass the U-boat.
Hold that thought, because I'd like to give you an answer to that, but not quite yet. So let me tell you a little bit, if it's okay, about Balance of Terror and its production. And then we'll comment on that. So let's talk about writer Paul Schneider and how he came to Star Trek first. Gene Roddenberry had first gotten to know Schneider on the first show that he created, The Lieutenant. So when Gene was looking for story ideas during the first season of Star Trek, he reached out to Schneider and asked him if he had any ideas to pitch. Now, Schneider had not written any science fiction before, so he had to look around for some ideas that maybe he could reshape into a science fiction story, and he found it with The Enemy Below. So he submitted his first outline to Gene on April 14th, 1966, and then resubmitted a trimmed-down version on the 26th, a week or so later. Now, it's funny, too, because his story idea for Star Trek was pretty big, probably as big as the film The Enemy Below. And in it, it had lots of action scenes between the ships, and Bob Justin looked at this thing and was like, you've got to be kidding. In fact, there's a quote here from a memo that Justman wrote, quote, "There are certain basic elements in this piece, which will make it well nigh impossible for us to produce it. Just the miniatures and optical work alone can wipe us out," unquote. And of course, he's talking about not only the budget for this show, but it could burst the budget for several shows around. At that time. Gene liked the idea, though. So he worked with Schneider to compact the show, to reduce it down, to trim it down, and make it more cost-effective. And in fact, the two of them came up with the idea for the cloaking device as a cost-saving measure. So you don't have to show the ship on the screen so much. It doesn't cost you so much money to produce that.
Yeah.
Matt Jefferies also reduced costs by making the Romulan bridge smaller, and he mimicked it on a submarine's bridge. So it not only saved costs, but it also echoed back to The Enemy Below.
Yeah.
Roddenberry and Schneider also made sure that firing the phasers, this is something they wanted to do so it looked like the movie. Firing the phasers went through a chain of command for dramatic effect rather than just Sulu pushing a button. So if you remember, in almost every other Star Trek episode, it is Sulu, fire phasers. Mr. Chekhov, fire phasers. But here it's an order, and then the order is echoed. And the echo gets finally to the phaser room, which, by the way, we never see again.
No.
But there's a phaser room in this episode because there's a torpedo room or a group firing depth charges in the movie. And Roddenberry wanted to echo that as much as he could. That's why we see the phaser room.
Yeah.
So reaction to the story was really favorable by both the studio and NBC. And in fact, that reaction, as it was all being developed, got Justman on board. He kind of quit resisting, and he also started finding ways to cut costs and get the show produced on a budget. John D.F. Black and Gene Roddenberry finally polished the script in July 1966, and it was produced from July 20th through July 28th. That's 7 days. And this is about a month and a half before the series ever premiered. That's kind of a mind bender when you think about that.
Yeah.
They shot, and again, I think Balance of Terror is one of the best episodes that Star Trek produced. It's not the best, but it's in that category as one of the best. But this is produced before the show ever premiered. In fact, the director, Vincent McEvedy, had to be given film copies of earlier shows that had already been edited, so he could kind of get the flavor of the show and how it was supposed to look and flow. And of course, he also looked at The Enemy Below.
Right.
So the total cost for this episode was $236,150, and that it's about $20,000 more than in the episode that follows, and about $60,000 more than the episode that preceded it. So it was kind of high, certainly higher than the other episodes going on around that same period. When the show aired, it was a solid second in the ratings for the first half hour, and in the last half hour, it was a third. But when it was rerun in August, it was number one, baby. 32% of all TVs were watching Balance of Terror. Next week, we take you inside Star Trek.
It's Gene Roddenberry's 1976 album. See you then.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.